Hello and welcome back to 5 Minute Materials, the show where we demystify every node in the Unreal Engine material graph. Today, we are talking about DDX and DDY. Now, what is DDX? What is DDY? What is that? How do you even spell that? So DDX and DDY are the partial derivative. All we really need to know as lay people is what it does do. Let's just focus on DDX, which is going to be using the X screen space coordinate, so the side to side, left to right. If we make a new material and we put it on this cube, and let's just get a texture. So let's get a texture of these flower petals. You can see that this is white and this is black. If we put this into the base color, then you see we have black, we have white. However, if we plug this black and white value into the DDX node, then you'll see it does something kind of funky. You can see there is this white outline on the right side of our little flowers. If we actually absolute this, then you'll see that there is actually a negative value on the other side. So there we go. Now, what is this actually doing? So imagine that we have some pixels, and in the case of our flower texture, it's pretty much just a white texture which has some black values in the middle. Let's chuck a little 0.5 here, just for, a bit of fun. So what the DDX DDY functions are going to be doing is telling us the difference between the pixels going from left to right or top to bottom, or it might be different in Unreal because of, Unreal does some weird rendering stuff with like coordinates and whatever, blah, 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 blah. So let's start with the top left. Going from 1 to 1 is 0. And then going from 1 to 1 is 0, 1 to 1, 0, 1 to 1, 0. Keep in mind, this is just the DDX going from left to right. And so then this next line going from 1 to 0 is going to give us -1. Then going from 0 to 0 gives us 0. Then going from 0 to 1 gives us +1. And then we're off the edge of the screen, but we can presume that it's more ones, off the edge. So that would then go to 0. And then down this line, we're going to go 1 to 0. That's -1 again. 0 to 0.5 is going to be 0.5. 0.5 to 1 is also going to be 0.5. And then 1, presuming we've got more ones, blah, blah, blah. And then down here, it's just 0, 0, 0, and 0. Oops, I just realized that's supposed to be 0 because the ones continue on, blah, blah, blah. So if we just go and we color all of our zeros in as middle gray, and then we go to the 1, that can be, white, and 0.5 can just be, gray. This can just be black. Although if we absoluted, like we did just previously, these would become white. So you can see that we have this white color on either side, to the left and the right, of our black value. So remembering that our flowers were black and the background was white, going from 0 to 1 gives us a value of 1, or just a positive value if there's a bit of gray in the middle. And then over here, these were negative. We can also just visualize that if we just add 1 and divide that by 2, smack that in there. So you can see these dark values represent the negative values. The gray represents no change in luminosity, and the white value is the increasing values. Now you might notice that this kind of looks almost a bit like a little bit like a normal map. And if we actually got the DDX and the DDY and we appended them together, X, Y, fucking 0. No, fuck you. We just chuck that in, then you can see we have a normal map with a silent G. So one anomaly that you might run into when you're using this node is if you have something that has some like gray values in it. So let's use like a cloud noise texture. Let's just pump the strength of this up. So you can see here, we've got this nice looking normal map sort of thing with our, derived from our cloud noise texture. However, as I zoom out, you can see that it kind of gets more and more strong, and it also just looks super pixelated. Now, the reason for this is, as we look at it, you can see that there's this white part here, there's a nice like gray gradient, and then there's black here. But as we zoom out, those gray values kind of disappear. And because it's screen space, you know, partial derivative from left to right, pixel by pixel, then the values are greater. We get less of those steps from 0 to 0.1 to 0.2, and it's basically just going straight from 0 to 0.5 to 1. That's why as you zoom out and as you zoom in, the effect becomes more and more bad, basically. Now, another thing you might notice when you're using DDX and DDY is that everything looks kind of pixelated. So pixels are always rendered in a 2x2 segment called a quad, and pixels can't actually really, you know, compare themselves to anything outside of their own quad. So in practice, what is actually happening is we're actually just measuring the difference within one quad of the top left to the top right. That's our DDX function. And the top left to the bottom left. And then that will actually give us the value for all 4 pixels. So we never actually use the bottom right pixel. And so the value returned by these comparisons fills the entire quad with just one value. So we end up with a very coarse measurement that kind of looks like it's at like half resolution or quarter resolution. So that's why everything looks like it is quarter resolution compared to everything else on the screen. It does take the textures mipping into account, but it itself doesn't mip, which is why we get this crazy result from a distance. You might notice that in unlit mode, where there's no aliasing or anything whatsoever, that this looks super pixely. If you are in like regular lit mode, the aliasing will, you know, make it look a bit, I don't know, smoother, blurrier. All right, so you can see here we've done our silly little screen space normals derived from the screen space spatial delivery partial derivative. But you'll notice that you can see these bits down here are highlighted and these bits are shaded. But as we move around in a circle, you can see that the shading is also changing. And that is because, as I said before, we are in camera space, we're in screen space. So in order to get our derived normals into tangent space, the best way that I've found to do it is to put a 0 into the Z. Now, the only reason we're doing this is so that we can then use the transform node, which only takes in a 3 vector. We're going to go from view space to tangent space. Then if we put that into the normal, you'll see that it gets a bit angry because there is no B value, or there isn't a proper B value. So we're then going to mask that, and then we're just going to append 1 into our doodad. Bam, bam. We do that. Everything looks decent, and we're going to put this into there. And you can see now that these normals are still shifting around, and that's because I forgot a very extremely important step, which is really dumb, but we need to flip the X value around. So it's showing us the right to left. It's to do with like the way that, you know, the UVs are like 0 to 1 and the blah. Anyway, this looks good now. We've got like this nice like pink here, and the pink is always there, and the blue is always here, and the highlight is always here, and the shadow's here. No matter what way we look at it, we now have some tangent space normals derived from a black and white texture mask. All right, so with our little schmoobly doobly, we still have that issue from before, which is when we zoom out, this gets like giga strong. And as we get really close, it gets giga weak. Now, the way that I've opted to do this is just to get world position and then get the camera position. Camera position, world space. We're just going to get distance. So distance between the world position and the camera position. We are going to divide that by 100 so that it's less impactful. This is just a magic number. You know, I am a magic number. And then we're going to add 0.1 so that we cannot divide by 0. So we put this into here, that into there. And essentially now we're just going to be dividing or lessening the strength of our, normals as we get further and further away. And then we're going to slightly increase it as we get closer and closer. So if we look really close, it gets really strong. If you're finding that it's too strong up close, you can just adjust this kind of minimum value. And then as we get further and further away, it will fade itself out until it is nothingness. If you're finding it's fading itself out too much, you can divide this by a bigger number. And I mean, in essence, we now have our normals from a height map or a black and white mask from any distance, and it's quite simple to set up and very useful. Now there are some other functions called prepare perturb normal HQ and perturb normal HQ. And you gotta do this into there, and then into there, and then into there, and then you get this into there, and then this is the world space normal, which you then transform from world to tangent, bam, bam. And then if we plug that into the normals, you can see that there's not really any difference aside from ours being slightly stronger, so we can just turn that down a tiny bit. Let's switch between them. Yeah, not really a difference. The only difference is that this one results in 140 instructions, and the version that we did just earlier results in 130 instructions. Wow, we saved 10 instructions, and instruction count is so important. Blah, 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 blah. Anyway, this one here, it's kind of just like black magic. It does DDX and it does the thing, and then in this one, it's DDX, DDY again from world space, so it's recalculating the normals. Here it's doing world position, DDX, DDY, although then it crosses that. It just uses a lot more stuff. It does a lot more calculations. Oh no, my landscape. Oh no, my landscape is red. Oh no, my game something. Right, so if we took all of this stuff and we just collapsed it into a function, I've called mine Pris Normals from DDX DDY, you can see that we've just got everything from before, and we output it here, and we can now just get any black and white value and just get normals from it, which is fantastic. So why would we want to be deriving our normals from a height map or from a black and white value? Well, the main draw for me is that you can do some procedural texturing and generate normals from it. So if I got some sine waves and we were modulating the text coordinates in, I don't know, the R channel, and we just chuck it into the siney boy. Period can be 0.25, so we're gonna have lots of black and white lines like this. We can then get our DDX normals, DDX blah 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 blah, chuck that in there, put that into the normals, and you can see now that we have normals, a normal map from something that we don't even have a texture for. This also works if you are combining textures or adding contrast to textures. So for example, if I get these clouds and we put these clouds into this cheap contrast node and, you know, chuck it up to 10 or something, and then we put that into our doodad. And so what you can see is that we're getting normals for the resulting texture modification, or the, you know, the resulting result. The resulting result. So this is a really good way to get normals where you usually wouldn't be able to. You can imagine this being really handy if you were doing like a cloud, you know, panning cloud generation, texture-y doodad. So we're just going to get like 2 cloudies and we're just going to make them pan. So you can see now we've got our 2 clouds panning over the top of one another. And then we're just adding an offset and then doing some contrast. But then we are calculating the normals from the result of these 2 textures being combined. So you can see that as they kind of combine and make these extra little, you know, clouds at the edges and whatever, the normals are all being calculated on the fly. And this is very cheap because the DDX DDY value pretty much just is readily available for the pixel shader to, you know, to eat up. So yeah, this is it's a super duper handy node. I'm a big fan of it. And just as one more example where this normal map derivation can be really handy, so when you're using things like flow maps, which I talk about in another video called Intro to Flow Maps, coincidentally, but you can see that this foam, it's a combination of a bunch of different textures. They all get added together and blended, and it uses distance fields and all that good stuff. And then we can use the DDX DDY method to give the foam a little bit of bumpiness, a little bit of depth. So if we go to world normal view mode, you can see that the resulting foam can have its normals derived, which is super duper handy. Let's imagine for a second that you are doing some kind of Gerstner wave or whatever. I'm just doing a procedural noise node, 3D noise. It's just like panning downwards, and I'm just using that to do some upward deformation. This could be like sine waves. This could be Gerstner wave calculation, whatever. The point is, if you're doing world position offset effects, you will notice that the normals do not update. And if the normals do not update, then the lighting do not update. So if I just put in a color, you know, blue, like the ocean, then you can see that this looks completely flat. If this was casting shadows, which I probably wouldn't want it to be because it's like super glitchy and whatever, then you would see some shading, but that's just from cast shadows, which is why it looks like super pixely and it's super buggy. I'm not a big fan of it, so I'm just going to put this back to single layer water. But without cast shadows, this would just look like a flat blob. So we have this wave generator, wave WPO thingamajig. We're doing that up and down in the Z direction, and that is going to our world position offset. What we could do is get this world position offset value and just put that into the scalar input of our normals from DDX and DDY. This is going to be going from like, you know, 0 to 100 and like negative 100 and whatever. It doesn't really matter, but we can just get this and chuck that into our normals. And you can see we now have a result, which is calculating the normals from, you know, our completely procedural combination wave generation thingamajig. Now, one thing to keep in mind with the method that I'm doing, which is slightly cheaper and simpler, these might not be 100% correct, as in like this angle, you'd have to do like crazy math and stuff. You can probably use the perturbed normal HQ function. It would probably work better, and this may or may not be more accurate. Yeah, that looks pretty much right. So if you need high quality calculated normals, especially if you're doing something like world position offset, where, you know, this needs to actually be accurate to what is happening, you'd want to use this one here, the perturb normal HQ, with all the magic that it does under the hood. But if you're just worried about textures and applying textures and stuff, then this cheaper version may be sufficient for your, you know, your style of game. And as you can see with our wave example, the normals are being updated or calculated. So this is just a really good way to get the normals back when you're doing, you know, world position offset effects. So the other thing to keep in mind with this effect is it will only actually give you the correct normals for WPO if the WPO is only in the direction of the vertex normals. So previously we were just doing it up and down, and that's because this plane was just facing straight up, so it didn't really matter. But you just got to make sure that you're using the vertex normals to do the deformation, so that if we look over and do this like on its side, you can see that, you know, these bits that are now supposedly facing up, they look like the up facing, you know, up dog. So just another thing to keep in mind. All right, one last little thing that I've used the DDX DDY nodes for is for some really scuffed edge detection, or like edge wear shadering. So this is our, you know, we're starting with this. This is a Megascans asset. The geometry is a little bit all over the place, but what I've done is we've gotten the vertex normals. So we're looking for the difference from left to right of the vertex normals in view space. We then get the R normal, chuck it DDX. We get the G normal, DDY. We're going to get the absolute of them. So if we just get this red one and we put this into the base color, you can see we're getting this. So like in this crevice, the difference reading from left to right on the screen, where the normals essentially changing at a steep angle, is white. And same would go for any outer edges and whatnot. You could not do the absolute so that like the cavities would be a different color to the edges. Anyway, so we're doing that in both directions. We're then adding them together. This is just a strength value. You'll see what it does in a sec. This is just our, you know, regular old camera distance hack, nice and cheap to like make it so it's not as distance dependent. And then I'm just getting a noise texture and multiplying the result by that texture. And then we just add some contrast, and then we're just going to use that to lerp between two colors. And then you can see we have some very kind of scuffed polygonal looking edge wear. Obviously, if this is used a lot more subtly, then, you know, you'll have better results, especially if you use more texture to kind of noise it up and whatever. But you can see that it's getting something done, which means that, you know, ideally you would want to be baking in this kind of detail to like the vertex color, or potentially if you hate having disk space, you would make a new texture for this and then sample another texture just for the edge wear for every single model that would need this thing. But this method, it's kind of quick and dirty. It's not perfect because, you know, the way that DDX DDY works, it doesn't seem to be able to access like the smoothed normals. So if we just like looked in world normal and had nothing plugged in, you'll see that the normals are all smoothed, but DDX DDY doesn't seem to pick up on that. You might be able to dig into the perturby boy and, you know, do it all from there, but it's a lot. So I'm just happy with my little scuffed version. I don't really need much else. If you do need more than that, then it's not my problem. Now with our edge detection stuff, it seems like the vertex normal is actually really quite stable. And I think what's actually happening is maybe at the point of the vertex, it's doing, you know, DDX DDY sample and then applying that, you know, kind of to the whole vertex. I'm really not sure, but as an addition, we can also try using the pixel normal world space, which is going to give us a very kind of noisy, crazy result. We might try tone it down a little bit. You can see that we don't really get the, you know, the kind of edge, the edging. We could also try using our normal map itself. So we're essentially getting, you know, the curvature, like the edges and cavities from the texture that we're using. Again, it's not perfect and it is still quite shimmery and unstable. So I would recommend, if you're using, you know, either pixel normal or the texture itself, to just add, you know, a small amount of it, maybe like 10% pixel normal. And that way, you know, you can get a little bit of extra stuff going on, but it isn't going to be like completely overbearing. and that should help fill in some of the, I guess, like the pixel cavities and, you know, pixel edges instead of just the vertex edges. And so again, we can see that in unlit mode, it is super shimmery, super noisy, but you know, when we're in lit mode and we've got temporal anti-aliasing and all that kind of stuff, then it kind of chills out and we are left with a decent result. So anyway, just a, you know, quick dirty edge detection-y sort of doodad. Very handy, very cool. It's a nice little bit of spice, and it means that, you know, you don't have to bake it to all the models and that kind of stuff. So I can just swap this model out with a different one, you know, Quarry Cliff 07, whatever, and you can see that the edge wear, it's still there. If we go to a different one, you can see it's got edge wear. So it is procedural and it is quite cool, as they would say. So there we have it. DDX, DDY, DD's nuts, DDZ. That one's not real. I hope you enjoyed my few little scuffed examples. Keep in mind, I am no expert. I haven't really used this a ton, but in essence, DDX is giving you the difference between the left and the right pixel, and you can use that to generate normals. You can use that to correct normals on, you know, vertex normal based world position offset effects, such as Gerstner waves or just sine waves or any kind of, you know, flobbity blobbity. And lastly, you can also use it to do some edge wear. Now, my edge wear version is like super scuffed. Someone out there may have a more robust version that can somehow get the smooth normals with the DDX DDY. That person is not me. One thing I did think of is that if your model was using object space normals, so you essentially bake the world normals of the object into the texture and then convert that on the way out and whatever. You could use those normals as long as they were like smooth normals to do edge detection on the fly. But at that point, if you go into that trouble, you may as well just like bake the edge wear mask into the vertex color or into another texture, and then obviously you'd have more control over it and all that kind of stuff. With the DDX and DDY, you don't really get much control over the size of things because it's just the, you know, left to right pixel or pixel quad values. So if you've got a texture that is just pure, you know, it's a white line and then a black line, you're not going to be able to kind of smooth out a normal between them. What you get is what you get. Speaking of what you get, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you do want to support these videos monetarily, you can do so through the Patreon for as little as $1 per month, which is always in the description of the videos. As always, thank you very much for watching. And with that, we say goodbye. Goodbye.